There are movies that entertain, and then there are movies that burrow so deep into the cultural imagination that decades later, people are still quoting them at dinner tables, still rewatching them on quiet Sunday afternoons, still arguing about which scene was the greatest. Tombstone, the 1993 Western directed by George P. Cosmatos, is without question one of those rare films. It gave audiences one of the most celebrated ensemble casts ever assembled for a Western. It delivered dialogue so sharp and so perfectly delivered that entire generations have memorized it word for word. And it created characters so vivid, so alive, so completely realized on screen, that they feel less like fictional creations and more like old friends you happen to meet through a television set. But here is what is fascinating about Tombstone. Even after all these years, even after countless retrospectives and anniversary specials and behind-the-scenes documentaries, there are still things about that film that most fans never fully understood. There are still layers beneath the surface that the average viewer never got to see. And the man who has been most willing, most thoughtful, and most candid about pulling back that curtain is none other than Sam Elliott, the man who brought Virgil Earp to life with a quiet authority that perfectly balanced Kurt Russell's more explosive Wyatt. Sam Elliott is, by any measure, one of the most respected actors of his generation. His voice is immediately recognizable. His presence commands attention without demanding it. And his perspective on Tombstone, shaped by decades of reflection and an intimate knowledge of what actually happened during that turbulent production, is something that every serious fan of the film deserves to hear in full. Because what Elliott has revealed over the years, piece by piece, in interviews and retrospectives and candid conversations, changes the way you see Tombstone. Not in a way that diminishes the film. Quite the opposite. It deepens it. It makes you appreciate it more, not less. It helps you understand why, against all odds, against all expectations, against an enormously better-funded competitor, Tombstone became the film that endured. So let us go through it, all of it, the things Sam Elliott has shared, the truths behind the production, the human stories beneath the performances, and the reason this movie continues to resonate with audiences more than 30 years after it first arrived in theaters. Before a single camera rolled, before a single actor was fitted for a costume, before a single location was scouted in the Arizona desert, there was a screenplay. And that screenplay, written by Kevin Jarre, was the reason Sam Elliott said yes. This is something Elliott has returned to again and again in interviews over the years, and it deserves to be understood fully because it explains so much about the finished film. Jarre's script was not a conventional Western screenplay. It was not a paint-by-numbers frontier adventure built around shootouts and heroic posturing. It was a deeply researched, historically attentive, character-driven narrative that treated its subjects as complex human beings rather than mythological archetypes. Jarre had clearly done his homework. The dialogue crackled with authenticity. The characters, particularly Virgil Earp, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and the various members of the Outlaw Cowboys, were drawn with unusual depth and psychological specificity. For Sam Elliott, who had spent decades working in the Western genre, and who had developed a sophisticated sense of what distinguished genuinely good Western storytelling from a merely competent, Jarre's screenplay was something close to extraordinary. He has described reading it as the moment he knew he wanted to be part of this project, not because the role of Virgil Earp was necessarily the flashiest part on the page, but because the overall architecture of the script was so strong that he trusted it would produce something memorable. This matters enormously when you consider what happened next. Kevin Jarre, for all his talents as a writer, struggled with the logistical and creative demands of directing a large-scale ensemble Western. The production was complicated, the schedule was punishing, and Jarre found himself overwhelmed by the pressures of managing a sprawling cast and crew while simultaneously trying to realize his creative vision. He was let go early in the filming process, a decision that sent shockwaves through the production and created an atmosphere of genuine uncertainty. But here is the crucial detail that Elliott has consistently emphasized. Jarre's script survived. When George P. Cosmatos came in to take over directing duties, when Kurt Russell stepped up to provide the creative leadership that kept the production coherent during the transition, the foundation they were all working from was still Kevin Jarre's screenplay. The bones of the film, the character arcs, the iconic dialogue, the structural decisions about which moments to linger on and which to push through, all of that came from Jarre's original work. Elliott has been clear that this continuity was what allowed the film to maintain its identity despite the upheaval behind the scenes. He signed on for a specific vision of Tombstone, and even through everything that went wrong, that vision remained largely intact on the page. It is worth pausing to appreciate what this means for how we watch the film today. Every piece of dialogue that fans have memorized, every character beat that feels so perfectly calibrated, every moment of emotional resonance that makes Tombstone feel like more than just an action western, that was Kevin Jarre. His screenplay is the invisible architecture that holds the entire edifice together. Sam Elliott knew it from the moment he read it, and he has never stopped saying so. There is a reason Virgil Earp works so well in Tombstone, and it is not simply a matter of casting. It is a matter of Sam Elliott understanding at the deepest possible level what kind of man Virgil was and what kind of presence he needed to project on screen. Virgil is not Wyatt. He does not carry the film's central emotional arc. He is not Doc Holliday, burning with brilliance and tragedy. He occupies a different space in the story, the space of the dependable older brother, the man whose steadiness makes the more volatile personalities around him possible. In a lesser film, with a lesser actor, Virgil might have faded into the background, a supporting player without real definition. But Elliott brought something to the role that transformed it into one of the film's most quietly essential performances. That something was rooted in his personal history with Western material and with the cultural landscape of the American Southwest. This showed in his portrayal of Virgil. Watch Elliott in Tombstone and notice how much he communicates without words. The way he carries himself, the set of his jaw, the measured quality of his movements, all of it speaks to a man who has seen things and processed them, and arrived at a settled understanding of who he is and what he stands for. That settled quality, that absence of self-doubt or performative swagger, is precisely what Virgil needs to be. He is the anchor. He is the one whose stability makes the family unit function. Elliott has spoken about approaching the role not as a matter of performing an archetype, not as a matter of putting on a costume and doing his best impression of a Western lawman, but as a matter of finding the genuine human truth inside the character and letting that truth do the work. That approach, that fundamental commitment to authenticity over showmanship, is what separates a memorable performance from merely a competent one. And it is what makes Virgil Earp, even in a film packed with extraordinary performances, someone you cannot take your eyes off whenever he appears. Let us talk about what was actually happening on the set of Tombstone during those turbulent early weeks of production, because it is a story that illuminates not just how the film got made, but why the people who made it were so proud of what they ultimately produced. Kevin Jarre's departure was not a quiet, orderly handoff. It was an abrupt and disorienting transition that left the cast and crew in a genuinely uncertain position. They were in the middle of a large-scale production with a complex script, a sprawling ensemble, and significant financial pressure. The director who had conceived and initiated the project was gone, and into that vacuum stepped George P. Cosmatos, a filmmaker with experience, but also someone who was walking into a situation already defined by someone else's creative decisions. The atmosphere during those early days of the transition has been described by multiple cast members as tense and uncomfortable. People did not know quite what to expect. They did not know whether the new director would try to reshape the material significantly, whether the creative identity of the film would shift, whether the script they had all committed to would survive intact. These are not trivial concerns on a film set. They go to the heart of whether the people involved can do their best work. Sam Elliott's account of his first real interaction with Cosmatos captures the mood perfectly, and in its way, reveals a great deal about who Elliott is as a person and as a professional. Shortly after arriving on set, Cosmatos approached Elliott privately and asked, in what Elliott has described as a direct and challenging tone, whether he was going to have trouble with him. It was the kind of question a director in an insecure position might ask, a preemptive assertion of authority, a way of testing whether the actors were going to cooperate or resist. Elliott's response was immediate and instinctive. He turned the question right back around. He asked Cosmatos whether he was going to have trouble with him. It was not a defiant or hostile response. It was simply the honest, level answer of a man who does not traffic in false deference, but also is not looking for unnecessary conflict. What Elliott was communicating in 4 words was that he came to work, that he expected to be treated with professional respect, and that if those conditions were met, there would be no problems whatsoever. Cosmatos, by all accounts, understood the message immediately. The tension between them dissolved almost on the spot. From that moment forward, their working relationship was solid, professional, and productive. It is a small story in the context of a large production, but it tells you something important about how Tombstone survived its own internal crisis. The people involved were direct, honest, and ultimately committed to getting the film made. They worked through the friction rather than letting it fester. The other figure who deserves enormous credit for the production's survival is Kurt Russell. Multiple people who were on set during those weeks have described Russell's role in keeping the film on track as nothing short of essential. He was deeply engaged in the creative process, not in a disruptive or ego-driven way, but in the manner of someone who genuinely understood the material and felt personally responsible for protecting it. He worked closely with Cosmatos, discussing scenes, adjusting blocking, ensuring that the tone of the film remained consistent with what Jar had originally envisioned. He arrived early and stayed late. He was the production's North Star when everything else felt uncertain. Sam Elliott has acknowledged this aspect of the Tombstone story with characteristic directness. The film found its footing, he has suggested, because the people at its center were willing to do whatever was necessary to make it work. And for Russell, whatever was necessary meant stepping into a creative leadership role that went far beyond what his acting credit would ever reflect. If there's one aspect of Tombstone that Sam Elliott has returned to with the most consistent and unqualified admiration, it is Val Kilmer's portrayal of Doc Holliday. And if you know anything about how Sam Elliott operates, how careful he is with his words, how disinclined he is toward empty flattery or exaggeration, then you understand that when he speaks about Kilmer's performance with the kind of reverence he has expressed over the years, he means every word of it. Doc Holliday is one of the most extraordinary performances in the history of American cinema. That is not hyperbole. Kilmer did something genuinely rare in that role. He created a character who is simultaneously larger than life and completely, heartbreakingly human. Doc is brilliant and funny and dangerous and dying. He is a man who has made his peace with the fact that his body is betraying him and has decided that the only response is to live as fully and as intensely as the remaining time will allow. Kilmer found every layer of that character and put them all on screen simultaneously. The preparation that went into the performance was extraordinary by any standard. Kilmer studied the historical Doc Holliday with intense focus, researching his background as a dentist-turned-gambler-turned-gunfighter, his long struggle with tuberculosis, his relationship with Wyatt Earp, and the particular quality of his wit and intelligence. He worked on the accent, the physical mannerisms, the way Doc's illness would have affected his breathing and his posture and his energy levels. He thought about every aspect of the character at a level of detail that most actors never achieve, and then he brought all of that preparation into his performance so naturally that you never see the work beneath the surface. You just see Doc. Sam Elliott has described watching Kilmer work as one of the genuine privileges of his professional life. He has talked about visiting the set on days when he was not scheduled to be there, not for any professional reason, but simply because he did not want to miss the experience of watching that performance unfold in real time. Think about what that says. Here is a veteran actor with decades of experience, someone who has worked with extraordinary talents throughout his career, and he was so compelled by what Kilmer was doing that he showed up to watch even when he had no scenes to shoot. That is not professional courtesy. That is genuine artistic awe. Other cast members have reported similar experiences. The set during Kilmer's scenes had a particular quality, a heightened attentiveness, as though everyone present understood they were witnessing something worth paying attention to. Crew members who have worked on hundreds of productions have described Kilmer's performances on Tombstone as unlike anything they had encountered before or since.